With all the focus over the past decade or so on standardized testing and how Common Core, FITTV believes that our schools have failed our youths at teaching them sufficient civic education. This failure has developed a generation that is removed from the political process. The average student does not know that much about history any longer, or whether they're dealing with revisionist history or not is another story. Their local state representatives are not necessarily in touch with the populace. Is there sufficient student awareness? Do young political hopefuls know enough to advance the opinions of others? Can they sell their ideas to the uninformed voters? And I have with me several young political hopefuls. On my left, Juanpablo Andrade. Did I pronounce that right? Andrade. Why can't I get that? To his left, Adam Sommer, Young Democratic Club. And to his left, to help us out with this recent Democratic candidate, Gary Jacobs. So we're worried about this because we see that the education system has fallen in recent years, and there's not enough civic education. We can't seem to get there. So I'd like your opinion first about that. What is it that we can do, or do you see the same thing I see about the education dropping away and not enough civic education being available?
The only thing I could really say about, especially with the Common Core that that Governor Cuomo has implemented, the best thing, in my opinion, to do is for the people who, obviously many parents don't like Common Core, just get out there and rally against it. There was a rally recently, I believe, in Port Jeff Station with governor candidate Rob Astorino against Common Core. That's the best thing to do, rally against it, and obviously the opt-out option, which a lot of parents are doing right now.
Do you notice that some of the teachers are having problems with it? So I don't know where to stand on this. I have no idea whether it's a good idea or not. All I know is everyone's up in arms.
I think the point that Chris is making is that because of all this focus on Common Core and the testing, that they forget about the civics, and it's all about these other things that you need to learn. But there's nothing in there about civics, so they don't teach it.
And the kids don't seem to know it.
Right.
You guys are probably exceptions, but yeah, it's not focused enough.
It seems as though at this current point that the teachers feel that there's so much pressure amongst them that they have to abide by a certain set of standards and adhere to those standards. And even Cuomo denounced Common Core, said that it was rushed and was implemented in a haste pace. And from that, it was derived that students cannot perform to those standards as implemented by the Common Core, and that's caused such controversy and has far delayed educational advancement.
But I think the interesting is that, as Juanpablo said, if you don't like it, get out and protest. And that's something that we always say.
Yeah.
If you don't, so what, most people don't get involved. They don't go out and they complain about it. They go on Facebook, but you're saying, hey, go out and do a protest if you don't like it. And that's what America is all about. But I think most of the youth don't do that. So what is it that made you guys say, hey, you know what? When we want to fight for something, you're the exception.
Yeah.
What sparks you to do that, and what can we do to get other people involved, whether you're for it or against it?
Either one of you.
I guess the reason for me, myself, the reason I got involved, especially with the protests, is just, obviously we have to reform the education, especially with Common Core. The children in the future can't be, I guess, studying the standards that the governor is currently implementing. Most of the parents, like I said before, aren't allowing their kids to take these tests, which don't just jeopardize, obviously, their education, it jeopardizes the teacher's education, because depending on how the grades of their students are, that depends whether or not the school decides to keep them.
Let's handle, I'm going to breeze through we have a shortened version of the program today.
No problem.
Let's talk about some of the more recent topics if we can, and hit on them. Respond at will. Term limits. Personally, I am for term limits. I don't know, Gary, are you?
I'm definitely for term
Okay,
limits.
how do you guys feel about it?
Also, yeah, I'm 100% for term limits also. I don't think that a candidate should be able to run numerous amounts of time and stay for 30, 40, or 50 years in office if possible. I think that depending on what office position, I think after 20 years or so, you should give someone else a chance to run for that office.
I think it sparks innovation to have a new set of influence within certain levels of government. So that is why I am for term limits, to have a refresh of ideas and to have new possibilities to exist within the local, state, and federal level of government.
Do you see that basically politicians have taken advantage of being in place for such a long time, and how the voter has a very weak appearance of somebody in place for a long time? They begin to fall out of character with these people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to a degree, you have to understand that for certain voters, that they have an obligation or they have loyalty towards a specific government representative, because that is the person that has been serving them and representing them within local, state, and federal. And name recognition is a major factor that people consider. And when they're voting for their incumbent, they think of the positives and the negatives, and they're unsure of having change. And change is a critical component that is taken into consideration.
Okay, rapid fire now. What about gun control? Recently, recent days, especially since what happened in Connecticut, it posed a big problem for people rushing through and getting some legislation through against it. How do you feel about it? Should we say gun control rather than the Second Amendment? Is that reasonable, or should I say the Second Amendment?
Yeah, I think that's,
Okay.
I mean, especially being a student, and a lot of these things happen in schools, and and both from different parties. Curious your perspective on gun control.
Yeah, either one.
In my opinion, I think there should be gun control laws, but I do not think that it's right, especially with the SAFE Act right now, which has been in the news numerous times. I do not agree with the SAFE Act at all.
You think it's too overreaching, or?
Yes. Yeah. I think there should be, especially in schools now. There's multiple times within schools there's been bullets found in schools, guns in schools, and obviously shootings have happened. I think the allowing guns in schools is definitely, they have to change the security for that to make sure that it gets prevented 100%.
Can there be security guards or something with guns? Or are you talking?
Actually, brought up by Isa Hutchinson, I believe, right after, as a resultant of the Newtown shooting, the School Shield Act, which was had major coverage over that duration of time previously, that basically allowed for certain schools, and certain schools have taken it up, to have security guards with armed guns, and to also train teachers to handle guns and to protect their students and their school in an effective and efficient manner. But it was poorly designed and developed, from my personal opinion, and that overall it's not a good idea for various other factors that we could go into.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At greater length on another day.
That's a show to itself.
I got one very important one that just recently happened. The Supreme Court recently placed a ruling on affirmative action. How does one feel about that? Are you familiar with affirmative action?
Yes.
Okay. Either one of you go ahead. They stopped, right? It was,
I think there's a fight now to
6-2.
bring it back for the colleges.
It was a 6-2 vote, I think, in the Supreme Court, right? Go ahead.
That actually, the affirmative action, I haven't heard that much about it.
I know it
In the news.
happened yesterday, I think, so it's understandable, yeah.
I can touch base. Essentially, Gratz and the Grutner case versus Michigan, those are previous affirmative action cases. I'm not familiar with the current one that you were speaking of that just recently happened, but essentially within
They
those two
referred
cases,
to Michigan, so maybe that's the one.
those were the two.
Okay.
I believe it was 2003 or 2006.
Six
It
sounds
was Gratz
familiar.
and it was the Gratz versus Michigan and Grutter, and essentially it's whether a quota system is being in place to sustain racial implications, to make racial factors a critical component in voting, not the be-all, end-all, but primarily just a factor that's considered, not, okay, you are of this minority race.
You were right by the Supreme Court's decision. I basically want to know how you feel about.
Well, those two cases had different verdicts. One was it did not violate the quota system. One was it did violate the quota system.
Great.
But as somebody in your generation, how do you feel? I mean, because now you're far removed from affirmative action.
Just affirmative action.
So your generation hasn't really had to, see it. Pretty much, a lot of people would say, "All right, we did it.
Yeah.
It did what it had to do. Now let's move on and make sure there's no discrimination." How do you feel about? Do you think we should still have affirmative action? Or now that's done, and everybody has an opportunity. We have an African American president. There's certainly a lot of.
I think times are changing and evolving, and at some point it should become eliminated just simply for the fact of reverse discrimination, which is now currently becoming prevalent with, like, say, majority
I'm glad
races
you acknowledge that
being-
because there is a lot
Yep.
of reverse.
And it's a
prejudice,
prevalent
yeah.
issue that is being neglected and disregarded and has to be accentuated further.
Well, didn't the decision to turn it down have that in there? The Michigan case, I thought.
I think
believe-
it
yeah.
referred to it. I'm not too familiar, as I said before. But
It's too new.
yeah.
I'm sorry to
It
surprise
was
you guys with it, but
2006,
it's too new, yeah. All right, well, I'm wondering how this happened, because I was for affirmative action when I was in college.
Yep. Well, it's a change of mindset
Hmm.
as you transition.
Well, there certainly is a lot of reverse prejudice. I had to felt it myself, so I'm now not for it, as much as I was. Do you think it matters what party's in office? Are your party affiliation? You have a core belief system. Do you think that that's the value system that you want to carry going forward? And it does mean something. And can you really break bread with somebody on the other side of the aisle? I know these are little wild questions, but I need to have some kind of answer from you, because it's important, because I find it very difficult to associate now with somebody I don't agree with politically. And other people I know have expressed the same. And it's a little scary out there, to be honest with you.
Yep.
I don't like it.
It's the main purpose of bipartisanship is to be able to compromise, to make viable decisions, to help forward viable legislation that will impact society as a whole, because we have to put constituents and overall the general populace, the country, first, and then put our ideology second, even though our ideology is our core belief system. So because of that, for my personal self, I am able to break bread. I am willing
Yeah.
to make bipartisan decisions with the opposing party, because there is logic and there is ways
logic in both
of
ways,
making
yeah.
compromise.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
compromise is a key factor in
You
creating
sound-
viable
You
resolutions.
sound hopeful. How do you feel about that?
Yep.
I actually also agree with him. Bipartisanship is definitely something that has to be done.
Has to be done, right?
Yeah, that has to be.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, I am a Republican. He is a Democrat.
Mm.
But obviously, we have to work together, because at the end of the day, our goal is to serve the people.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the fighting of the two parties, to some extent, it's a good thing, because it stops things from happening too fast. Because a lot of us are for less government, and sometimes when the government just stays out, that's a good thing. So to some extent, I think the parties, fighting with each other, is a good thing, and then we come together like on 9/11. But I think what Chris is alluding to, when you're sort of indoctrinated at a young age that, hey, I'm a Republican or I'm a Democrat, that you almost can't even see the other person's views, and you can't work with them. And if parties can't work together at the end of the day, it's going to be a problem.
All perspectives must be taken into consideration to move
Yeah.
forward.
Yeah, in order to be fair. Okay, that's good. Okay, tough. Recently, what state is it? Denver, Colorado, they legalized marijuana. It's a sensitive subject. A lot of people still feel it's a gateway drug. How do you guys feel about it?
I also agree definitely 100% that it is a gateway drug. I don't think that it should be legal in any form, medical or recreational use. I'm 100% against marijuana being legalized in any state.
So you have that connection with the gateway. How do you feel?
From a social perspective, just simply the fact of having the ability to choose, make your own decisions, and also the fact of the economic benefits towards the economy, revitalizing the economy through the prosperous monetary value that may be sustained through having marijuana, the sale of recreational marijuana as well as medical marijuana. My belief in pro-choice, ability to make your own choices and go about whatever necessarily.
Choice in a general sense.
In a general sense,
Yeah.
not regarding.
Okay, well, that was my
different-
next question.
Yeah.
You think I'm going to let that one slide? Go ahead. How do you feel about the abortion situation? Recently, one of the doctors was convicted, I believe, of killing fetuses outside of the womb. Personally, you should be interested to know that I was petitioning for abortion before Roe v. Wade. I was a college student way back then at Hunter College, and I was for it. I'm not for it anymore, but I'm just saying at that time, that's what I felt my youth was able to do, and I wanted that to happen, and we got what we wanted at that time. Do you think it's a good idea that we consider aborting, and if we do, what term, and what do we do with it? I mean, it's a tough decision, I know, but
In my opinion, I'm most likely with pro-choice. I think the woman should have the right, if she wanted to ultimately get an abortion, that she should have the right to get an abortion. Obviously, not go into the office, have the abortion. And
Did you know that that's not where it started, Juanpablo? You know, it's not where it started. It was never a choice issue when it started. It was about health and safety. It morphed into choice many, many years later.
Oh, okay.
So
I did not know that.
Yeah, I want to make sure that that's heard, because if we all think it was a choice from the beginning, then we can all take the standard marks today, and then we can make our arguments from there. But I believe that since the law was put in place, we morphed it going forward. It was first 8 to 10 weeks. Then it went past the first trimester, then into the second trimester, and now we have late-term abortions, and now we have this doctor being... So what I'm wondering about is a law? I think it went too far. How do you feel about that?
I think the interesting thing that you said, Chris, is how you started off in your youth being for it, and as you got older, your philosophy changed, and I think that happens with all of us. But that's why I think it's interesting with younger people.
You better believe it.
You guys
It's
are
the reason why I was interested in this program, because I morphed myself. It took some 20 years or so to remove myself from where I was to where I am now. But it doesn't mean I wasn't affected by things. I didn't learn from things. I'm wondering how you felt. I'm very curious about if you're able to transition. Would you transition out? I mean, that's a tough one. Would you transition to the other party?
Do you switch?
I mean, seriously, think about it, because that's what I did.
But I think it's interesting that them being young, though, that their positions, it shows the difference. And if all of our elected officials are, say, 45 and older,
Right.
they're not really representing the youth, who may have a different feeling. And do you guys feel that your philosophy, and you're both working in government with elected officials who are obviously older than you, do you each feel that you guys are being represented in government?
I believe personally that certain government officials have their own personal ideologies, that some, even though you're associated with a specific party, some of them have very leftist, mid-leftist, partially leftist, or vice versa with the other party, and going on that, you can understand that certain specific issues aren't represented exactly the way that you want them to go about. Also, to touch base quickly on transitioning in party-wise, there are general factors that are taken into consideration, that when you are of a certain age, younger age, college, you tend to be more liberal,
Right.
and then as you accumulate more wealth, various other factors,
And age, just plain old age sometimes.
Age comes into consideration, and wealth as well, various other things. You can tend to become more
Yeah,
conservative.
well, it's good that you know that.
Yep.
Is that how you feel about that?
I also agree, yes.
Yeah. I figured that. Okay, now, a couple of questions in the last couple of minutes we have. What specific injustices do you feel are prevalent in our society? What do you feel you want to head towards? What hits your hot button?
If you can get in the system, what would you change if you were elected tomorrow? What would you want to change in the
shoot for?
system?
Yeah.
I guess if I was running like my main platform, my background has been mostly public safety. So if I was to run tomorrow, I believe my platform would be mostly on my main platform would be on public safety.
And do you feel it's an issue today also? I mean, you have that feeling.
I
Is
think
there
it is
injustices in that
I think
area?
it is the public safety. I know the police, not much of the police department, but the corrections facilities. Right now, the Suffolk County Correctional Facility is one of the most overcrowded jails in New York State. Like if let's say someone's arrested for stealing a car, there's a possibility that person might be in the same jail cell with someone who murdered 7 people.
Right. People in child support have a similar situation. We
Yes.
just did a program on that. They're spending a lot of time in jail, and sometimes they're just behind in child support. Or like the recent show we did, they just multiplied his income beyond his reach. What button touches you before
Hot
this
topic.
last minute?
Very quickly, I did an extensive amount of work within New York City, within that general area, and I looked into stop, question, frisk, which I felt was a good practice. However, it was implemented very poorly and was taken far out of its context and extent, and therefore a lot of civil rights, civil liberties were broken. It went far beyond its reach of what it was intended to do, and it was not handled properly, almost analogous to the Common Core.
I would like you guys to come back when we have just a little bit more time. We can have a little bit more of a share and maybe do a slightly longer program. Thank you, Juanpablo Andrade and Adam Sommer, and of course, Gary Jacobs. Societal and political trends are rapidly breaking down the family that once was the cornerstone of our great American culture. At FIT, we know you cannot get this information on your own, so we'll bring it to your TV every single week. My name is Chris DiMaggio. Thank you for watching FIT TV, and we'll see you again next week.